Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Jack's Business Talk. Today, I had some questions about the propaganda and economics. So, whenever I have a question about economics, there's one person I usually watch on YouTube to try and get answers from, and that's Uneducated Economist. So, that's who we have on today.
Uh, Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate you.
Oh, it's always great having you on.
Yeah. So, talking about the propaganda, huh? This is something that I have been studying for quite some time. And as I was looking through the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve and listening to their own speeches and the words coming from the FOMC, this is the Federal Open Market Committee, the people who vote on monetary policy. I found that there was something taking place within monetary policy that essentially forced them into a new form of monetary policy where they would use a new tool, basically using forward guidance, credible threats, signaling job owning. Now, with this, we find that the evidence of it is now taking place within the economy, that they're using their words to power the economic activity that has taken place out there. And it's not so much about their actions. And as I have gone through the studies, I found that there is actual speeches that have been given talking about how it is that the communication can deliver this economic power through their distribution of words and specific sentences. So ultimately, that's kind of all of it in a nutshell. And I can break down all the different aspects of this, where it started, why they did it, and ultimately how they're using it today. So,
Let's start with where it all started from. Like from my understanding, and it might go back further, is from the speech with Ben Bernanke, or did it go back even further than that?
well, ultimately, Ben Bernanke was talking about deflation and how to prevent it from ever occurring here in the United States. And in that speech, he was talking about an event that could be possibly coming in the future. Now, that event was when the Federal Reserve, the Fed funds rate, goes to zero, hits the what they would call the effective lower bound, or the ELB. Now, this effective lower bound is when the Fed funds rate has no more further downward adjustment in interest rates in order to stimulate the economy. Now, Ben Bernanke recognized that over the course of the previous 30 years, there had been ever increasing amounts of downward shifts in the Fed funds rate, and that at some point it was going to hit that lower bound of zero. Once it does, and no more further downward adjustment of interest rates can take place, their monetary policy is now ineffective. So interest rate adjustments became a broken tool. And so they switched to something called forward guidance. Now, he describes forward guidance with a little parable. And now I can actually read that parable to you. Give me 1 second and I'll bring it up here. This is, let me see if I can, where is it? Here we go. So it goes like this. Um, let's see here. The zero bound on nominal interest rates raises another concern, the limitation that places on conventional monetary policy. Under normal conditions, the Fed and most central banks implement policy by setting target for the short-term interest rates, the overnight federal funds rate in the United States. So this is them talking about how it is that they adjust the interest rates within the banking system that essentially, bleeds into the rest of the economy. When the short-term interest rate hits zero, the central bank can no longer ease policy by lowering its usual interest rate target. So he's saying right there that it's no longer working for him. Um, and then he goes on to say this. At the broad conceptual level, and hold on. Here we go. Sorry. Some observers have concluded that when the central bank's policy falls to zero, its practical minimum, monetary policy loses its ability to further stimulate aggregate demand. So this problem, when the Fed funds rate hits zero, that's it. It's over. They can't lower interest rates. By lowering interest rates, you can get people to go out there and buy houses, cars, go on vacation, and ultimately businesses would start to invest and hire people. And by hiring people, those people are now participating in the economy, and that's increasing the aggregate demand. So essentially, once you get to zero, you can't do this anymore. It's not going to work. Says at a broad conceptual level, and in my view, in practice as well, this conclusion is clearly mistaken. He goes on to say, indeed, under a fiat, that is paper money system, a government in practice with the central bank's cooperation with the government agencies should always be able to generate increased nominal spending and inflation, even when the short term nominal interest rate is at zero. So at that point, he figured it out. He says, okay, so we got an idea. So we're heading into this. This is 2002, going, had an idea that the great financial crisis, not maybe not necessarily the great financial crisis was coming, but an issue in which that the Federal Reserve would need to stimulate the economy, but they would hit the lower bound of zero when they did. At that point, they would not be able to stimulate the economy. And he says now in practice, this is a clearly mistaken idea and that there is a way that they can deal with it. Let me put my glasses on. I'm going to read this better. It says the conclusion that deflation is always reversible under a fiat money system follows from some basic economic reasoning. He goes on to say a little parable may prove useful. Today, an ounce of gold sells for $300 more or less. Now, suppose that a modern alchemist solves his subject's oldest problem by finding a way to produce unlimited amounts of new gold at essentially no cost. Moreover, his invention is widely publicized and scientifically verified. He announces his intention to begin massive production of gold within days. What would happen to the price of gold? Right. So at that point, anybody who has ever followed the market knows that if there's this dude out there who can produce unlimited amounts of gold with very little cost or energy going into it, that the value of gold would essentially plummet. Right. He goes on to say that presumably the potentially unlimited supply of cheap gold would cause the market price of gold to plummet. Indeed, if the market for gold is to any degree efficient, the price of gold would collapse immediately after the announcement of the invention. So now here, this is what it gets important, right? Because now the market is moving based on the information that has been delivered, right? Now, he says, before the alchemist had produced marketed a single ounce of the yellow metal. So you think about it, if this is scientifically verified and proven that this guy can do this, the market is going to go out there and start acting preemptively, and the price of gold would plummet even before any gold was ever produced and ever entered into the market, but the market would move. Now, this is what Ben Bernanke was talking about as far as a tool to use into the future. And then as the great financial crisis took place, the Fed funds rate hit zero and quantitative easing and forward guidance promising zero interest rate policies for the foreseeable future. And this is what ended up stimulating the economy, or the attempt to stimulate the economy.
I'm just trying to digest everything you just said.
I know I overwhelm the people when I talk sometimes.
But I know the first time you talked about that speech, the Ben Bernanke speech, um, I was I was in high school at that time, and we had a politics class. And the first time you said that, I was just like, I remember hearing this. I was like, where did I hear it? And then you said Ben Bernanke. I was like, that's why I heard it before. I was like, because he's other than I don't know why I'm name blanking. The current Fed president.
Powell,
What's that?
talking about Powell.
Yeah. Other than Powell, Ben Bernanke is probably the only other one I could probably name.
Well, Greenspan was pretty popular.
Yeah, but I don't think I would have
Yeah.
got him until someone said his name though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was quite a few of them. Volcker, he's pretty popular.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Fed, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, they're quite popular in the sense that a lot of people want to give them the credit or the blame for what it is that's taking place within monetary policy. But ultimately, the chairman of the Federal Reserve is the spokesperson for the FOMC. So
Hmm.
he's talking on behalf of the FOMC as a group. He's not the person who's in charge necessarily of the outcome of the FOMC. I mean, he has his input, but there's 11 other voting members, five alternates, and two advisors that sit on the FOMC to conduct monetary policy. And so, really, what it comes down to the chairman, it's how they're using their words in relation to speaking on behalf of the FOMC, right? So when it comes to speaking about monetary policy, like the actual strategies of the FOMC, that's usually deployed through the chairman. Then you have like the officials coming out and giving their own opinions about the monetary policy, but that's like those are two different types of communication. One of them is speaking on behalf of the group, and the other one is speaking on behalf of their own opinion.
Yeah.
And that creates confusion, and that was actually done on purpose. I mean, they do that to create an open-endedness so that their deployment of information is more powerful. So basically, if they raise the uncertainty, the more they use their words to guide certainty into the markets. For example, right now we have like pretty much everybody convinced that there's going to be an interest rate cut coming into the future, right? So this September rate cut, or however people are looking at it, is ultimately being written in. Like, I'm finding articles that say the Fed has signaled a September rate cut, and I'm like, they did? I didn't see that. Like, I didn't see that part. But people are convinced by this by some of the words that are being used. When people hear this, they start to deploy their strategies in the idea that they're going to front run this concept of an interest rate cut. So then you start seeing mortgage rates going down. People start taking out mortgages thinking that they're going to be able to refinance going into the future, and then it starts creating this economic activity, but yet the Fed hasn't done anything yet.
Yeah, there was a couple mortgage people, one of them I had on my channel, and he commented a little bit about how people are acting like the mortgage rates are going to go down. And he's like, yeah, he's like, they've gone down slightly on some of the products that we offer at this time. However, it has almost nothing to do with the fact of the Fed doing anything. And it's all based on what the news and everything is saying. And with the confidence boost is dropped the 10-year part, and that's actually what's actually causing it to drop slightly. And people are acting like it's a big drop. He's like, it's literally like zero point 0.2.
Yeah, yeah, like nothing, right? um but I think the idea is that it's actually happening, right? It's not maybe the amount of it, because for me, like, I don't know if it's necessarily going to always be like this major move that's going to be like all of a sudden this overwhelming the economy with this profound difference. It's the direction in which that it's going. So here you have a restrictive Federal Reserve monetary policy, and yet you're finding mortgage rates coming down just based off of the news. Even if it's just a small amount, it's still an impact, and it's the direction in which that they were headed. We found this very similar thing taking place at the end of 2003 going into 2024, with the promise through the dot plot that there was going to be like seven interest rate cuts coming in 2024. And everybody had this really excited idea that there was going to be all this, you know, economic activity happening within the mortgage markets. And you actually saw mortgages coming down. The moment that the Fed cut, it came with a fear concept to it, and everybody lost their mind, and interest rates started moving the other way.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily the Federal Reserve you need to focus on, but the communication about the interest rate cut. Are they doing it with a stimulating idea or a restricting idea? Like, are they doing this out of desperation, or are they doing it out of general support? So these are two different ideas that are now the market's going to absorb, and then it's going to quickly move into asset prices. The Federal Reserve knows how to do this. They know that there are specific words and sentences that they can use, and they've admitted this. Like, I mean, Jefferson admitted that. Hold on, I'll tell you. And it was like in February, I believe, just this year. Let me bring it up here. This is February 21st of 2025. And the title of this speech is Reading Between the Lines, Textual Analysis, and Central Bank Communications. And in this speech, I mean, it's just one of the most like self-admitting, like, I don't know, propaganda deployment. I don't know how do you want to describe it, but basically it's just admitting that they just use these words and sentences to increase or decrease the asset prices. But it says this: using textual analysis, high frequency asset price data, and high frequency central bank communication data, this research shows that investors' reactions to specific sentences communicated by the central bank are quickly incorporated into asset prices. So if they want like essentially people say that the Federal Reserve is trying to support the market or something like that. They don't have to support the market. They can get the market to support itself. All they have to do is just deploy specific words and sentences.
Hmm.
Right?
So with all that, do they just use certain words to get the market to, or the not the market, the media, just to then start pushing an agenda? Would you say?
Well, I mean, I think it really comes down to just the people's own perceptions of what it is that's happening. And, misunderstanding the monetary policy is really easy for a lot of people to do. And then once you have misunderstood the policy from the beginning, then everything else after that is really, it doesn't matter because it's just like, it could be anything after that. It's all illusions. So most people had misunderstood what the Federal Reserve was attempting to do in the first place, as far as like trying to get their monetary policy to this 2% inflation target. Well, over the last 5 years, they've been in what they refer to as a makeup strategy, although they weren't technically in a makeup strategy because COVID made the makeup strategy irrelevant, but they were going to allow inflation to run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time. That right there, most people missed. Right? They didn't see that. And so as the Federal Reserve is using their words and sentences to guide the markets, we're finding that the outcomes that come from this are either easing or tightening the financial conditions that are out there. I'm sorry, man. I forgot what the original question was. I just got rambling.
Oh, I was saying different words and stuff that they use that the media then grabs and spins it.
Right. And so that's one to for example, like I mean, 2% target that the media like just ran with. They were like, why doesn't the Fed see anything other than this 2% target? And I'm thinking, well, the Fed does see something other than a 2% target. They see flexible average inflation targeting, which is going to allow inflation to run over the 2% quote target to make up for deviations from that 2% target. But the 2% target is literally a long run average. So if they hit 1% inflation, 3% inflation, 1% inflation, 3% inflation, 1 and 3 and 1 and 3, but never, ever, ever once ever hit 2% inflation, they would still be on target. Right? Because they're doing an average inflation rate over time. So this is how most people have misinterpreted the Federal Reserve to begin with, and the media pushed that propaganda. So as people were thinking, "Oh my gosh, the Federal Reserve has lost control. They have no idea what they're doing. Hyperinflation's coming. It's out of control," kind of scenario. This is essentially benefiting the Federal Reserve because they were trying to make up from the shortfalls of the 2% target over the previous 10 years. That, again, was never explained to the people out there, even though the Fed ultimately said it. We are, keeping interest rates extra low, extra long for an extended period of time to make up for this shortfall. But people didn't hear it that way. They said they were going to make sure that they're going to stick to it till the job was done. And everybody says, oh, they're causing inflation. They're causing inflation. And it was just like, yeah, because it's part of the makeup strategy. Nobody
Hmm.
knows this. What do you know? It's like, and so that in the sense, like, the media was the mainstream media narrative to me was completely inaccurate, like from beginning to end. And what's interesting about it is that if you looked at what it was that the mainstream media was saying, if you kind of took like their understanding of the Federal Reserve and placed it back to about 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been fairly accurate. Right. But they didn't realize that it switched from this interest rate adjustments to forward guidance. And now the Federal Reserve is using words and sentences that are, absorbed into the markets. Prior to Greenspan, like Greenspan was the last real chairman that didn't deploy information specifically into the economy. They had what they would do is really keep the monetary policy fairly secret. And then when it came time to adjust policy, it was just all of a sudden deployed. Everybody was like, whoa, wait a minute, the Federal Reserve moved. Nobody said anything about this. Like, why? Like, it was like shock and awe event. But then they found as time went on that they could use those words and sentences ahead of time and actually get more power out of the interest rate adjustments. And then they found as time went on, their communications got so good about it that the expectations of what they were going to do meant everything to the Federal Reserve. Right? And so
Now,
now they guide expectations.
now, would you say that there's any pros to them just shocking the market like that, or
Um, I don't, I mean, I think probably at a time there would have been, because the way that the Federal Reserve would try to create inflation was to increase the labor market, like get more people working, lower the unemployment. And so the Federal Reserve had this idea that if they could create more in an environment, an economic environment in which that there was lower interest rates for businesses to borrow and hire people, then that hiring of people would essentially move into the consumption. So people start working, increase their consumption, increases aggregate demand, and then they find their inflationary pressure that comes from that. And then same things, all things being equal, they would do the exact opposite. If inflation got too hot, they would raise interest rates, and they would see like the slowdown in the labor market, unemployment would rise, and then the deflationary pressures would start to kick in. And this is how the Federal Reserve would typically conduct themselves through this interest rate adjustments and stuff. So they found after the great financial crisis and the interest rates hit zero and the labor market essentially got really tight all the way to the end of the Obama administration, all the way through the Trump administration, historically low unemployment, and it failed to produce the inflationary scenario for the Federal Reserve. So they're not really conducting themselves in the fashion in which that they used to, because even if they were to create an economic environment in which that the unemployment drops significantly, it doesn't necessarily create the inflationary pressure that they were hoping to get from the labor market. It's essentially just doesn't work for them like that anymore. So now, really, I think the focus is going to be more on the. It's going to be more on. Excuse me, my got a terrible video production team. Okay, so the focus is going to be more on the people who are consuming within the economy. And now something that's really sad to see is the massive inequality that is now taking place. We got this huge, wealth divide, this huge class divide. And the people at the upper 10% of household incomes are doing close to 50% of the consumption. Now, that is scary to think about, because if you're trying to increase consumption in the United States, and you go and have a tight labor market and low unemployment, and lowering unemployment really doesn't seem to spark any more consumer demand coming from the labor market, because they're essentially debt saturated with low wages, and there's no real way that even a little bit of pay raise is going to get them out there consuming in any kind of significant way. The focus is now in on the top 10% who can increase their consumption and have been increasing their consumption. And when you have a higher interest rate environment, their return on capital investment goes up, gives them even more power to consume and within the economy. And so the Federal Reserve stuck in a position in which that they are trying to increase consumption, have really only one focus, and that's the top 10%. Because really, if you focused in on everybody else, their increase in consumption would just be a minute amount comparatively. So I think ultimately the Federal Reserve is now abandoning the idea of the working class individual and now more focused up on the elite. Sad. You know?
yeah? Well, I
But,
mean, you
I mean,
you have to focus on who's doing the most work for the economy and not.
yeah. I mean, if you think about who it is that was doing the most work for the economy back in the like 50s, 60s, 70s, you would find that there was a lot of manufacturing jobs that produced a lot of really good stuff and sent that stuff out there to the rest of the world, and the world sent us their money. That was a pretty good environment to be in. That gave us the ability to raise our standard of living in a pretty profound way. But this is when the Cantillon effect starts to kick in, right? So
Mhm.
as you start to increase your standard of living because you have all this new money that comes in because you've been producing and been very industrious with your skills and ideas out there, got a bunch of new money in, raised your standard of living. Are we back?
Yep.
Uh, so you increased your standard of living. You have now put yourself in a position in which that you have to maintain higher wages, and you got somebody out there who is building something, doing something that's very similar to what you're doing, and they're doing it for less wages. This is competition. And now your competition starts moving in. What are you going to do? You either lower your standard of living or you're going to lose your job, right? So ultimately, this is what's causing the manufacturers to leave the United States, which was our good manufacturing jobs that raised our standard of living. What do we have now here going on in the United States is a consumer-based economy. So it went from manufacturing, saving, strong economy to consumer debtor-based economy, and this is going to divide the this is going to be the major divider of the rich and the poor as new money pours in, and the people who have first access to that money, they're going to spend it at face value, put it into things that are going to have a return on investment. And then the people at the end of the line who can hardly make it through their wages as the every cost of living increases through the new money that's coming in, as they have trouble trying to maintain this standard of living, they essentially fall further and further away from the higher standard of living concepts. Then people wonder why it is that a single wage can no longer produce enough for our entire household. It's just like because we just don't live in that environment anymore. We have this major wealth divide, and the production of the nation isn't really something that is going to bring any kind of real return to that standard of living because we can't compete against people who are producing the same things. Yeah.
Well, plus too, I think the other thing people aren't thinking about a whole lot is the fact that the tariffs aren't really a end all answer in the fact that as long as the government is propping up a industry, so for example, we can either use the steel because I'm a little more familiar with steel,
Right.
or for you, the wood industry or the timber industry. But both of those industries, if the government is propping them up using the tariff system and stuff, then at any given time they can withdraw the tariffs and stop propping up that industry, and it just is going to cause a lot of hardship and heartache because it's just now everything that the tariffs did is just all out the window. And that's what
Well,
people don't understand by working in an industry like that.
yeah, and that's where I think like again, just like you were saying, like once the government has stepped in and says, okay, hey, listen, we're going to start subsidizing, we're going to start tariffing, we're going to start doing all these things to keep the manufacturing here or to bring manufacturing back. Now you have government intruding into your life. And a lot of people might say, well, this is a good thing, but it's not a good thing because now you're reliant on the government to stay in your life. And the moment that they get out of the way, boom, there goes your job, right? So now you're
Hmm.
reliant on the government to maintain your standard of living, and you're going to be very focused in on what it is that's going to be taking place. It's like hanging the carrot out in front of you and saying, hey, listen to me or else you lose your carrot, kind of thing. So it's the unfortunate consequence of being in a nation that had gone through such a massive industrialized revolution, bringing in that new money and raised that standard of living. I mean, we look back on it and say, hey, the American standard of living was such a beautiful thing, and have this American life that was only like a moment in time. Right.
Yeah.
It's not something that is going to be continuous going into the future. It was just literally like it was a nice blip, right? It was like that moment where it was just like the perfect timing. But other than, having a, I don't know, and other than having like like an actual education process that has people understanding what is taking place with the new money pouring in and how that works, I don't think that the human nature is going to allow any kind of return to anything like we had seen. Like ultimately, the people would have to make a conscious choice to not spend money on luxuries, period, no matter what, like at any expense, and then to deploy any extra money, the money that you make beyond the money you already make, deploy all that extra money into something that is going to have a return and this be like adamant about it, like almost like in a survival mode kind of idea. If the people were to do that for generations, and okay, maybe we can have a concept that would bring it back, but I just don't think that's going to happen.
Well, here's the other thing too that would be an option, and I don't. really know which one would be more difficult is if you brought up all the surrounding countries to your level.
Um,
And there's just
and I
a
thought,
lot more what ifs involved in that.
yeah. And so, well, let's think about that. All the other countries, like what does that mean to all the other countries? Like we can think about the ones that are like the emerging economies right now and bring them up, but then there's always an emerging economy right behind it.
Yeah,
So I guess by that nature, what we would have to do is stand still and never increase our standard of living ever again and let all these nations rise up. And then once they met our standard of living, prevent them from rising their standard of living until we all plateau out on the same level, which essentially means that we have to suffer with no growth, no increase, no extra, nothing forever. you
yeah.
know, so like
And
never
no one's going
again
to
will
want to do
we
that
ever.
either.
What's that?
And no one's going to want to do that either.
Oh no, no way, no.
So, with everything that's going on now with Jerome Powell and his, was it May that his term's over? Or is it June?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what month it is. I know it's coming up. Yeah.
For first or second quarter, we'll just call it that. What impact do you think that's going to end up having with everything? Do you think it's going to have little impact, a lot of impact, or
I think it'll probably have a lot of preliminary impact, like a lot of like I think the politics will use it to their advantage to have political pull in one way or the other. Um, before the chairman is nominated or selected or whatever. But the actual impact to the federal open market committees, like strategies, I don't think that will change much. Like I think what it was, the new consensus statement came out on Friday. So that strategy, like to internalize that strategy and then listen to the FOMC members talk about what it is that their opinions are, thinking about that particular strategy, because each one of them is going to have their own opinion on how to get to that strategy, right? Like they don't like a lot of them might have their own opinion on what the strategy should be, but they all came up with this consensus statement. So this is what they viewed together as their their accumulative goal is the consensus statement. So as they speak, it's speaking on behalf of the idea that they are going to try and get to this particular strategy. I don't know how the chairman's going to change any of that. Like the FOMC is going to be somewhat similar to what it was prior to Powell, with a couple of changes to it, with a couple of members changes. But for the most part, unless there's something that changes about the consensus statement or some kind of major impact to the economy, like some black swan event, then ultimately the chairman is just going to be speaking on behalf of the FOMC, and it's just the voice is going to change from Powell to somebody else.
mhm.
So, but the preliminary, like the speaking of it, I think that's going to have a lot of pull one way or the other. Like market's going to use that. The mainstream media is. I'm sorry, brother.
I can't help but laugh every time it starts to move.
I know. I'm just like, maybe if I put you down here, is that better? Put you down there.
All right.
So anyway, so this is how I kind of look at it, is that most of the ideas of what has taken place within politics really doesn't change the FOMC's opinions, and it doesn't really change their strategy on what it is they're doing for the long term. It might change like where they view interest rates need to be in relation to the strategy. So for example, they were, over the last 5 years, they were trying to be moderately above 2% for some time. Now, thinking that they were trying to be moderately above 2% for some time, that's pretty interesting to think also with inflation that they were also in very restrictive territory, right? So like these two, like it doesn't seem sense. Like if you wanted inflation to be moderately above 2%, you think you would want to be stimulating territory. But yet that's not what occurred. They were in restrictive territory because most people were thinking that they were trying to get inflation down. All right. So again, understanding that the Federal Reserve was never trying to get inflation below or at 2%, but to be moderately above 2% for some time was a much different idea than the Federal Reserve is trying to get inflation down to 2%. Right. So again, these concepts are very different. Forgot what you were talking about. I dropped the phone.
We're just talking about how the next person might impact.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
So that's it. Like I just don't think the chairman really has that much political pull, and I don't think they have that much, sway within the FOMC outside of, outside of their just, how well the people receive the message, Because I don't know, like, I mean, out of everything that I've ever studied from monetary policy, I can't think of anything specific that Jerome Powell has done.
yeah. Like you said,
Right. Like,
it's just a person that gets blamed for whether you. It's not like he gets blamed on one side; he gets blamed from both sides because it's just a lose position. Like you're not going to win in that position.
no. And
Like,
that's why I think like Greenspan was always talking. So he he talked in some real jargon, man. Like it was hard to understand Greenspan at all. And he even had like a famous quote where he said, like, if I said something, if you, if I said something, specific, you probably misunderstood me. Something like of that nature. I can't even remember how the quote went, but it was something of that nature. It's like, so he purposely talked confusing, in a confusing way.
yeah, I just had an image in my head. Um, because they always talk and they always try to confuse people and stuff. I was thinking the best chairman might be Boomhauer from King of the Hill.
Yeah, no kidding. Gonna get them to rates on down, eating this bugger on me. Dang on stimulation, man.
So going back to like the whole propaganda with the media, where how should I say like do you think the media is purposely shoved in a certain way, or because it just seems like it's kind of weird that they all end up saying the same thing, usually within like like within an hour of each other, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the videos of like all these different media outlets using the exact same, like line over and over again. So
Hmm.
obviously it was something that was distributed out to all these different media outlets to be deployed into the message. So it's sometimes you can really see the propaganda is pretty obvious, but for the most part, I really just think for simplistic purposes, the understanding because the understanding of the Fed and their monetary policy is such a complicated thing. Like, I mean, even I listen to a lot of the economists that I know personally who are pretty popular on YouTube and stuff. Like I hear like them getting pieces of what it is that I feel is happening, and I'm like, yeah, that's accurate. And then no, that's not what I mean, so I even disagree with a lot of them, thinking like, how come they don't talk about these particular points of the monetary policy? I think it's just so confusing that the idea of making it simple for people to digest the information ends up just coming down to, well, for lack of a better term, ignorance, right? Ignorance to the monetary policy. Like they think, okay, the Federal Reserve says they've got this 2% long-term goal. Like they're trying to have 2% for a long term. But that's not it. Like that's inaccurate. They're looking for this average inflation rate long term, with the long term expectations locked in at 2%. So even this 2% target that has been misinformed by the mainstream media, everything else that comes from it is also misinformed and misunderstanding it, because the way that people have internalized the information has now come down to this such a simple form that you can't look at it this simply. It's not because it isn't that simple. It's not the Federal Reserve is trying to get to a 2% target. It's a 2% long-term target. People say, ah, what's the difference? And it was just like, well, nothing, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I don't. It's like the difference is huge. It's a massive difference.
Yeah.
But because it's so hard to sit there and just like, okay, well, let's study it for like 6 weeks so that we can really explain the monetary policy appropriately. Most people aren't going to go through it, so it's just going to be the way it is. I mean, I wouldn't go to the mainstream media to get a bit of economic information, other than maybe like the actual numbers, and those actual numbers aren't real anyway. So if you're going to go get the actual numbers, I think it's more about the direction of where they're headed and by how much, because even the actual numbers are admitted lies by the government with FASB 56. So, a few years ago, FASAB 56 government agencies can now falsify the numbers for national security reasons. And so once you say that, regardless of them being accurate or not, it doesn't matter because if you tell me they could possibly be a lie, I have to assume they're all lies. And so this is the unfortunate consequences of now living in this era is that everything that you're seeing out there on the mainstream media is essentially a screen
Hmm.
for guiding you, right? It's like guiding the media guidance of the sheeple or something. I don't know. And even as people say, no, I can just read between the lines of what's going on out there. And I'm thinking, no, you can't, because if they never deliver the information to begin with, then you'll never ever be able to see it, no matter how much you read between the lines. You know?
Yeah. Or if it is there, it's so deeply embedded that, it's like trying to dig out a coal mine.
Yeah. Like, I mean, if you're really perceptive and you're really in tune, then maybe, occasionally you'll be like, right there, gotcha. You might catch those things eventually. But most of the time, it's just like, it's like trying to live off of fast food or something, you're going to die doing it. You know?
So, or what do you think as far as like, in your opinion, that they're trying to elevate from the beginning of like the long-term 2% rate? Do you think it's 10 years ago? Do you think it's, longer than that?
Well, it was in 2012 that they actually adopted the 2% target for
Hmm.
inflation. And at that time, they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to try and maintain 2% inflation. If inflation runs higher than 2%, we'll adjust policy down. If it runs under 2%, we'll adjust policy to stimulate, bring inflation back up. Now, this was going to let bygones be bygones. Right. So, like, if they screwed it up, it doesn't matter. Just, you know, eye on the prize. Just maintain 2% as best you can all the time, regardless of where you're at. Just get to 2%. If you're above it, get down, below it, get up, right? Just stay at 2%. Now, this failed them miserably, right? So basically, as soon as they adopted it, it failed. It ran consistently under 2% as soon as they adopted it, and they never once were able to maintain a 2% target, but they were able to lock in long-term expectations at 2%. And I think that's the point, right? They're never, ever, 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 ever going to be able to maintain 2% because they've never been able to do it, not in the history of their existence. And so I just don't understand any kind of belief that they're going to be able to do it going into the future. But they will try to maintain a 2% target running either above it or below it and trying to maintain that 2% target over the course of, however long. So when they adopted that in 2012 to maintain this 2% target, they got to 2018 knowing that they're going to have to switch their ideas on what it is that's happening. And that's when John Williams came out with that speech, Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. This is because they knew that the Fed funds rate at zero with a low neutral interest rate, which is the rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, it was so low to the lower bound of zero that there was no stimulating effect. But if they could have this average inflation rate over time, where they let inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time, they could pull that Fed funds rate and the neutral interest rate up off the lower bound and essentially regaining their ammo. So this was planned out back in 2018 as a suggestion of what it is that could happen with the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy. So, it was adopted back in 2012 and abandoned, or at least the concept was being abandoned in 2018. And you have to think, even at that point, they hadn't been thinking about it ahead of time in order to even give the speech. So, they knew right away that it was screwing up. It was like, this isn't working for us. We can't maintain a 2% target. We're going to have to go into higher inflation for a while to make up for the fact that we failed to do this. Because what's going to end up happening is if inflation runs persistently, consistently under 2% for a long enough time, people will grow to expect it, and long-term inflation will become unanchored, and they will start to lose the ability to adjust monetary policy again. So it's very critical for them to maintain a 2% long-term inflation target, because this gives them the room to use their ammunition, use the Federal Reserve Fed funds rate, and in the adjustment of it, or even the credible threat of being able to adjust it as their monetary policy. So essentially, like, the 2% target is just, it's not a real thing. It's just a
Yeah.
talking point because they can't do it. They've never done it. It's
Well, I always kind of consider it more of a reference thing just for them to say something like, just say, yeah, we're going to raise interest rates for yada, 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 2%, and they just slapped a fancy, catchy name on it.
mhm. I mean, really, you could say we're going to let it run between 1% and 3%, right? And then that if they're running down to 1%, they're probably going to become a stimulating, and if it runs up to 3%, they're probably going to be restrictive, and essentially still be at a 2% target, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that's like, I mean, they could communicate it in many different ways, I guess, but that's literally what it comes down to is the market's belief of what it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be doing going into the future. And they make sure to control that narrative.
So, not to change topics, but I didn't want to forget to bring this up.
Yeah.
So I noticed I've been trying to get better at what you told me to do, back in Vegas, and last time I brought it up, at seeing different how should I say different things happening in my local environment and stuff, and just
Oh,
how
yeah.
to. And I saw a big one earlier this week, and you may or may not have heard about it. The whole Cracker Barrel thing.
Yeah. I've been seeing like headlines popping up, but I haven't done any kind of looking into the story. So what's going on there?
So what's going on there is they decided to relogo and rebrand. The new CEO has decided to revamp everything to try and expand their fan base, I should say. And instead of just going with what they have, because eventually they're all going to get old and die. So they're trying to expand it out to include, so it's more accommodating for more people to come in. And let's just say that it's kind of like along the lines of Bud Light. I'm
Oh,
sure
okay.
you're familiar with that whole story. So kind of along those, a lot like that, but not exactly.
Like kind
So
of going like
anyway,
a woke style thing.
yeah, yeah. The new CEO was hired during the whole DEI project, and she's very DEI. But
Uh,
everyone is flipping and going crazy, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm just sitting here on the sidelines. I'm just like, I was like, but what are we missing? There's something going on behind it because I was like, because even looking at the whole revamping thing, like, yeah, the logos changed and they dropped off one of the founders off the logo, but the wording's still the same. Everything is just, logo sucks now. But the stores, they're saying the stores don't even look the same. It's just like, yeah, the stores look like an old like mom and pop store that I would walk into like out in the country somewhere where there's holes in the floor. And they're going from that to painting it gray and white. Like it's still, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like an old West saloon anymore. So like, and
Kind of going
but
into a more contemporary look or something.
Yeah, and like they're actually not even pulling the boards off the wall. They're literally just painting them.
Hmm, weird.
So, but what I'm seeing in this, and people are getting upset about it, and stock prices have dropped dramatically. And what I'm seeing is it's almost like in the food industry of it being kind of like a credible threat because they haven't done anything yet. Like there's literally they're saying that they're going to do it, like but they haven't done anything yet.
Like they're saying they're going to do all this remodeling, but they haven't done anything.
Exactly.
And so I guess the idea behind this could be possibly through the credible threat theory. Like if I was to use my conspiratorial mind and the idea of a credible threat, that if you deploy this information out there and you crash the stock prices because you're going to go woke, right? And
Well,
everybody
I think
flips out
that's
about
just
it,
I think the
right?
crash.
But then ultimately don't do it,
Mhm.
right? Because it was the credible threat of doing it, but then don't do it and say, "No, nah, man, everything's going to be cool. We're going to go right back to the way we were. In fact, we're going to go back to the old school ways. We're going to do it, and we're going to just move right in line with what it is that they had originally planned for their model, as opposed to this woke model or whatever, which is a deployment of bad information or something, and
Yeah.
then essentially cash in on the stock price move, right?"
Well, not so much that. What I was thinking more along the lines of they'll get the people that are trying to to come into their restaurants, come into their restaurants, and then after like 6 months of them not changing anything, the clientele that they lost temporarily will come back, and then the stock price will actually go up even higher, and they'll make more money in the end that way.
Yeah, kind of something of the similar nature. I mean, I think that's risky, you know, because that's relying on being able to like I mean I to me that's kind of I think that's I mean I could see where it could happen because you see like something very similar happen where like the like a particular organization will get together in an attempt to try and crash a short position or something of that nature. Now I essentially got involved in not necessarily involved but fell into the idea of crashing JP Morgan by buying silver. This was back in like 2010, 2011. And Max Kaiser was kind of heading this thing up, right? So all these people started running into buying physical silver to get it off the market, thinking that JP Morgan's short position was going to end up crashing them because they wouldn't be able to get the silver position or the price would go up so high they would have to pay all these investors. So anyway, everybody was jumping into it, talking about how awesome it was going to be. Well, this run into the physical silver brought prices all the way up to like $50 an ounce, and then it crashed. Right, it crashed all the way down into the teens. And so I think about that, like any kind of time I ever hear like particular information coming out in the mainstream media or coming out like a particular group is acting, I always immediately think, man, pump and dump scheme, right? Something's
Mhm.
happening here, or else they wouldn't be able to. And especially like when you have like meme movements, memes, like those meme stocks, and people are like all of a sudden just running in because all their buddies online are telling them to or something. That's a very scary situation to be involved with. It's just like because it could run up very high, but then also, crash almost immediately on things like that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I'm not putting any money into it, but I
right.
know like a lot of people are getting upset about it, and I'm thinking to myself, sitting on the sidelines, I'm like, why are you guys so mad about it? Like, it's their choice to play this game and to do all this. It's Cracker Barrel. It's not that hard to make their food and duplicate it. It's a few different seasonings and everything's fried. Like, it's like 90% of all the restaurants in America.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mean, I could see where that could be, something that's happening right now.
Yeah. There's something else I wanted. There's something else I wanted to tell you, and I forgot what it was. Oh, it'll come back. Oh, I know what it was. You were saying on one of your videos, and I don't think it was any of the videos this week. It might have been one of the videos last week. You're responding to a commenter. Um, there. asking for your opinion on how they should invest or something like that. And you gave a good answer about like how people at different ages and different aspects of their life, require different things, and that you don't really talk about that kind of stuff. But I agreed with what you're saying, but I also disagreed in a sense that you also had said something really brilliant in the past, but I think you might have only ever said it one time. And
What was it? Let me write it down.
but you're talking about knowing, like knowing your own personal economics and your own and treating your own life as an investment and in economics. You're talking about learning life skills and knowing, just trying to understand what you are and aren't capable of, and understanding how to prosper in different situations, and just understanding what your risk tolerances are based upon your age aspects, and also understanding what you can handle. So and like a couple examples you threw out there was like was one of them was canning, and you talked a little bit about your wife, and understanding canning is a good skill, just because then you can prosper economically, and you're because you can buy stuff that's on sale, take it home instead of just freezing everything and potentially losing it to a power outage. You can just go and can everything and stick it up on the shelves. And as far as understanding your personal economics on the side, well, you can't really do a whole lot if you're like, I don't know, I'm making up numbers, like 2 or 300K in debt. Well, your best economic perspective might be just get a second or third job and getting yourself to a point where you're financially free, and then investing into like whatever it is that you choose to invest in, but like doing your own research and understanding what you're doing. So it could be like in your case, Bitcoin, or it could be like in my case, real estate.
Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I think the idea is you have to own your own economy, right?
That's
And
that's how
that's
you word it. That's way better
right.
than.
Yeah. Owning your own economy. And that really comes down to individual decisions and what it is that you want for your lives, your life goals. Some people don't want a family. Like I can totally get that. Like, they're like, hey man, I grew up big family. I just want to, do my own thing, whatever. All right. And that's going to be a total decision making process for everything that you do. Then if you have like a wife and kids and all the other
Mhm.
responsibilities that come from it, like, you're just taking care of yourself or are you taking care of an entire family, there it's like your economies are not the same, right?
Yeah.
And so you really have to just look at yourself and look at it as and look at what position it is that you want to be in and then what position you are in. And once you start to recognize how it is that you can get yourself into different positions, especially when it comes to like living life, a lot of times people will hear me talk about cutting back on as much as you can and just get down to the bare bone necessities and do not move into luxuries, like no cars, no fancy things, nothing like that in life. And people are like, dude, you are so boring. You have nothing going on. You do not enjoy life. Maybe, if you just want to be like just a boring ass dude. Okay. So I hear that excuses. And then I think to myself right now, I was like, man, I have the ability to go buy any car I want, right?
Hmm.
I can go like right now and I can go and outright buy, don't have to buy on payments. Like, I mean, not like I can go and get a car. I mean, I can go and buy a car, right? Once you have that and you're like, you don't stress about wanting a new car. Like, you already, in your mind, you already have the new car. It's like it's already there. It is just like, the concept of actually driving it is no longer a big deal to you because you're actually driving a vehicle and you don't need the new car. That's my mindset. Like, I'm like, man, I already have a new car. I mean, I don't. I drive this old Suburban, but in my mind, I already do. Like, I have the ability to already have it. And so when I think about what it is that I'm doing for my position, it was just like, I don't really need those things. What I need is the ability to do those things.
Hmm.
Right. That's what I need because if I have the ability to do it, then I might as well have already done it, right? Because that's the way I feel about it. So now I think, okay, if I was in debt, which I am a little bit, I have some credit card debt. My only focus now is to get out a little bit of credit card debt that I have. So it's awesome. I don't have to think about investing. I got an investment. It's my credit card debt. Get that thing knocked out, man. There's no better investment than to get out of debt because you have to get a return on your investment that's beyond the interest that you're paying on your debt. So there's no point in buying into investments if you have debt. Just pay off your debt, you know?
Yeah.
So it's easy. It's like for those who are in debt, it's like, man, you are in an awesome position as an investor because you know right where to put your money. There is like no other focus that you have to look at. You don't have to think about the company, the PE ratios. You don't have to think about interest rates, none of that stuff. You just have to pay in that. So again, people have to take this into their own considerations. Where is it that I need to be? Where am I at? How is it that I position myself to deal with these things? Because what is my eventual goal? Once you take control of it for yourself and then you don't rely on anybody else to make these decisions for you, like where you're going to put your money. I have a 401k. I don't know what that 401k is invested in. I really don't. I don't look into it. I don't research it. I just throw a little bit of money at it and my employer matches it. So that's the reason why I do it because he's putting free money in there, right? So awesome. So I have a 401k, but it's not my only place. I also buy into Bitcoin. I have a stock portfolio that I've built up that I just kind of throw some stuff at every once in a while. And I think about the things that I know personally so that I can invest in those things. I don't know anything about computer tech. Like I don't know anything about computer tech. I'm not going to invest into any kind of computer tech company. I just don't know anything about it, right? And people are like, "Oh man, you can make all kinds of money in these particular stocks." And I'm like, "I don't. I'm sure I could. I just don't know anything about it." But I do know a lot about lumber, and I do know a lot about the building industry. And I do work in the building industry in the retail space, which is incredibly sensitive to the whole industry and in general. So when I think about where we are in the lumber industry, where we are in the housing market, where we are in interest rates and the Fed funds rate and the monetary policy and stuff, and I'm thinking, wow, there's this three-time leveraged ETF out there that I think I can make some money on. And people tell me, no, bro, you're not a stock investor, man. That is not the way you do this. You do not buy three-time leveraged ETF and hold on to it. That is absolutely crazy. Most people just hold on to this thing for 24 hours at best, right? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know any of that stuff, so I'm not smart enough to hold myself back like that. Maybe sometimes just being too smart is what holds you back. So I bought into this three-time leveraged ETF, and right now it's sitting at like a 52% gain. Right. So, and that was over the course of about 2 months. Not too bad, right? But I would never have been able to call that out within this particular ETF if I wasn't in the industry, if I wasn't feeling this like having the extra sensory perception, like, man, my gut's telling me there's a shift happening here, It's because of you know, the interactions I have with the suppliers, the interactions I have with the customers, the interactions I have with the people who I know who are in the or in the logging industry. I just like, man, I think we're at a bottom. I go, well, buy low, sell high. Okay, well, it's like that's how I do it.
Yeah. And the other thing to continue with what you're just talking about, at a point to it, um, I think you mentioned him on his channel. I can't remember the name of his book. Chris Voss. It's
Mark Moss,
what's that?
Mark Moss.
No, Chris
Oh,
Voss. It's a book about negotiation. What's it called?
oh,
Negotiate like your life depends on it.
huh.
But anyway,
I'm gonna look that up.
one of the things he talks about it because he was a international hostage negotiator for the FBI, and even if you don't want to learn how to negotiate better, it's an interesting listen to just for the stories that he tells. But one of the things he says is the worst negotiators, and he's like, I see this more and more true and in life. The smarter you think you are, or even like the smarter you come off, the more closed-minded you are, and the more sensories that you end up shutting down. And you're better off almost always looking at everything as a complete dumb person and keeping your mindset open to anything, so you're not missing stuff, and you actually end up making better decisions in the end.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. To look at something like you're a dumb person is actually probably one of the smartest things you can do because you're going to be very like inquisitive into the ideas, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're dumb and you're all of a sudden sparked with some interest, you start asking questions, you know? And that's ultimately the way you gain the information or the majority of the information by asking questions and thinking about it. But if you're closed-minded, you won't ask the question to begin with, you're right.
So I don't want to hold you up too long. So I just want to, and unless there's anything else, I just want to thank you again for your time.
Yeah, man, no problem, dude. It was awesome. I love having conversations with you, man. So yeah, you bet.
Yeah, we should do this again sometime.
Absolutely, man.
And thanks for tuning into this episode of Jack's Business Talk.